In this episode of the podcast, I had the great fortune to discuss sales management in general, plus leadership in particular, together with touching on doing business in Asia Pacific with Sami Ammous. Sami is a hugely experienced and very successful VP of sales, operating across the Asia Pacific region in a number of executive leadership roles for Avaya and for Cognigy. In the podcast, Sami has some great advice for new sales managers, and his comments on leadership I found particularly insightful. We discuss many aspects, including being respectful, having a clear vision, helping others overcome challenges, and holding other people accountable. Sami also provides advice for managers working in the APAC region, highlighting the need for adaptability, for building strong relationships, and he places a lot of emphasis for managers and leaders on being curious. There were many amazing words of wisdom, including one of my favourites. If I explain the objective to my grandma, would she understand it? Fabulous. Sami has recently launched a leadership and sales execution consultancy called Kiada. Details are in the show notes attached, together with his LinkedIn profile. So Sami, thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. What I'd like to do is discuss sales management in general, but then maybe talk specifically about leadership, which I know is a topic that you're particularly interested in.
Sure.
And I'm also conscious, a lot of your great experience has been in APAC, so we might want to try and compare your experiences in that part of the world and how much of what other people are doing, how much is relevant to you, what we can learn from APAC, and so on. Yeah.
No problem.
Excellent. All right. Well, listen, the first question is just a general one. It's just, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into sales management in the first place and kind of what your journey's been?
In all honesty, it started out as a young, hot-blooded, inexperienced individual contributor who thought he could do better and said, you know what, I want to run the show here. I'm sure I could do better. And once you get onto that track, you discover very quickly that reality is a bit more complicated than you thought.
Right.
And it was really just initially, it was honestly an intent from me to fix problems from a different point of view. So I always thought that there were things that we could do better in the company.
Yeah.
And I thought if I become a manager, I can contribute more to fixing those problems. And that's what got me onto the management track.
Oh, okay. And do you think you succeeded?
I mean, I've been doing it now for like a good 10 years. So
Yeah.
I think I enjoy it. It's something that but in all honesty, it's been a massive learning journey. And every time I thought, I have this figured out, there's always been something that just is like, hold on, you're still learning. There's something that you haven't figured out that you have to refigure out for whatever reason.
Yeah. It's when I have these kind of conversations, that's very often. There's a quote: the best got there by being continually better. So it's always trying to figure out new problems. Okay, so I get that. Looking back now, what would you say are the traits or the characteristics of a really good first line sales manager? So you need that desire to fix things, to make the world better. But if you're looking for first line sales managers, what are the things that you look for?
This might sound trivial, but a good sales manager needs to know how to sell.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the ability to sell, because a lot of individual contributors can sell, but often they sell instinctively. There's no structured methodology on how to sell, which is fantastic if you're an IC. But if you become a manager, you have to understand what your people are doing. And if they're selling instinctively and you're selling instinctively, it's hard to see what's right and what's wrong. So understanding selling as a process, as a structured process that's broken down. And that's something that you can learn. It's not, you can download videos online, you can read a book. It's not something that's rocket science. But understanding how to sell successfully, and then from there, looking at what your team does, and then understanding, is this good, is this bad, what can I do differently? So I think that's the base, as a frontline sales manager, that's the first thing you want to master.
Right.
The second thing that often sales leaders, or sorry, team leaders don't understand well, is that becoming a manager is not a promotion. It's actually a career change.
Yeah.
You move from individually doing the job that needs to happen to managing a bunch of resources to making sure that they deliver what you need to happen.
Right.
So it's the skills that brought you to where you are as a leader are not necessarily the skills that are going to bring you into the next step of management. So you need to worry about what other people are doing, how they're being motivated, conflict resolution, mediation, all of those elements that make a good manager.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's really interesting. So yeah, because a lot of people see it as a promotion, and it's. I mean, I did when I first got promoted. It sounds like maybe you did, um, but it is. It's a very different job. Very different job.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay. And so when you first took that step into management, what were the challenges for you? What's I mean, it sounds like a lot of things
I mean,
went well.
I'm sharing. So luckily, I was never a natural salesperson. I had to learn how to sell. So for me,
Okay.
the process was there, so I could see it in others. But the other part of it was, I just honestly, I just assumed that becoming a manager means that I just had to work harder on what I was doing before,
Okay.
and then you start getting bombarded with all these challenges that have nothing to do with what you used to before. Oh, this person didn't show up, this person is missing, this person didn't deliver what they're supposed to deliver. I have this conflict, I need this tomorrow, this your team says they're busy. And then all of a sudden you start bit by bit discovering what your value as a team leader becomes, and it stops becoming your ability to deliver. It starts becoming your ability to problem solve. And it's just, the more senior I became, the more complicated the problems were, the more it
Yeah.
was more about compromise and negotiation and mediation rather than, here's a black and white problem, choose black, choose white.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most senior managers, yeah, often it's that grey area that we're all working in, where you're trying to
Yeah,
find the best solution for a wide number of people. Uh,
yeah,
many people tell me that going into management, what strikes them is that as an individual contributor, you worry about your customers and there's a number, and maybe you need to keep your boss happy. But as a manager, you've got all these different people, stakeholders, internally and externally, who are
yep,
all demanding of your time. Is that your experience, and how did you cope with that?
100%. So I'll tell you, early on in my career, I heard someone say something that always stuck with me, and he said, in business there are no solutions, there are only compromises.
Oh, okay.
And and that just always rings very true in any, and I mean any business scenario.
Yeah,
Often companies, when they take decisions to go one way, it means that they didn't go another way. So there's like always a compromise in terms of, do you focus on speed or quality, do you focus on volume or quantity, do you,
yeah,
there's all these uh, uh, sometimes by definition two powers that pull in different directions, and you just need to choose the direction you go in.
yeah.
um, just to answer a question specifically, how did I manage to cope with all those? um, Obviously initially very badly. I made a lot of mistakes, I
Yeah.
upset a lot of people. I still remember there are people who were upset with me for years,
Okay.
because what happens is you take a decision, or you present a statement, and it's perceived, even the perception of that statement is not perceived the way you meant it.
Yeah.
So you're going in one direction, you're fixing a problem, and you upset someone, and then it's for years you kind of, there's always that tension, and then you interact again at some point in the future, and then realize, oh, that what happened was a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
But I did make some mistakes. But then, as I mentioned earlier, that softening of the language, that um, moving away from um, being judgmental about people, and more just tackling the problem and being respectful and accepting of people's opinions,
Okay.
trying to keep my cool. Those are things that really helped. You know, reading books and listening to podcasts has been, I think, a valuable tool of scale.
Okay.
So what I mean by scale is, instead of you relearning those mistakes, relearning the lessons from the mistakes that you make, why don't you see what other people's mistakes were? And predominantly reading books, listening to podcasts, reading journals, or whatever that
Yeah.
has to do with leadership and or sales.
Yeah.
Um, And it doesn't have to be some. Often people ask me, "Oh, what's the best book you read about X?" Almost any of the popular books are going to give you the foundation to really start building on the lessons in terms of how to handle conflict and how to handle disputes and to mediate.
Yeah.
And the more books you read, the more you're going to start seeing patterns about um, what the problem is, and you start, you know, underlaying the complex or the layer of the actions and people that things do and say. There's actually the motivations, and the motivations become much more common than the different actions. And once you get to the motivations, it's a lot easier to address those.
Oh, okay. Can you give me an example of that? Because I think I get what you're saying. Um, but
Yeah. So that person I had the dispute with,
mhm.
I'll just give you the example. It was very simple. He came to me before a meeting, and he said, "You gave me this. Your team gave me this proposal. Which of these elements are necessary? Which are optional?" And I looked at it. And I'm like, all of them are optional, and I meant it.
Okay.
Now, what I didn't look at in detail was that there was a set of requirements that this proposal was based on,
Okay.
and not everything was quote unquote optional. Like the product would have worked without these optional items,
Okay.
but it wouldn't have served the customer needs. And he ended up going and telling the customer, yes, this is all optional. They end up placing an order without these optional items, and then lo and behold, the product didn't work the way they wanted to.
Okay.
Now, the way he understood it was I was trying to screw him over for whatever reason. Like I didn't like him, whatever. He took it
Okay.
as, oh, Sammy screwed me over. In reality, I just answered the question and now that was my mistake. I didn't ask more questions,
Right.
but there was never an intention for me to sabotage him. But we end up working afterwards later, and we became good work friends.
Okay.
Not necessarily good personal friends, but work friends as there's respect and what have you. Now, what I mean by the intention beyond below it, if I take away people's actions and words, as in what they said initially, and
Yeah.
try to think about what is the why behind what they're saying,
Yeah.
it's often things like avoiding looking bad, wanting to look good,
Yeah.
wanting to serve their end customer, wanting to impress their boss, not wanting to look like they didn't know what they were doing, wanting
Yeah.
to look knowledgeable. So it's all about those things that are, reputation and perception, and maybe not very business essential, but they are very foundational in
Yeah.
how we behave as humans.
Yeah. 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 And that,
Yeah,
it's interesting because I see parallels with how we deal with customers as well, because yeah, they make decisions based on their personal motivations, often the similar ones.
100%,
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Oh, okay. And is it? Um, I mean, I will come back and ask you if there are any particular books you recommend, but uh, what you've described, is that more or less relevant, particularly in the kind of markets that you have experience in APAC?
Uh, I'm going to cop out and say it's more and less relevant, and I'll
Okay.
explain why. Honestly, what happens is understanding what's relevant to the stakeholders is a big driver of how to run sales meetings in
Yeah.
general.
And that's
So you
universal.
t-
Yeah.
that's universal, and you touched on it. So you touched on it when you said, that's how we deal with our customers. Absolutely, you want to make them look good, you want to make them look successful. Now the challenge becomes, what is it that makes them look good? What is their motivation to do that?
Okay.
And APAC in general is I'm generalizing here, so there's going to be exceptions, but in general, it's a collective society.
Right.
So that means that it's all about the group, it's all about the function, it's all about not upsetting the cohesion.
Yeah.
Um, right and wrong is important, but is not as important as looking good and avoiding embarrassment.
Right.
Um, looking, let's say, a more European or Western context, it's more about right and wrong. It's about doing things because that's
Yeah.
the way they're done.
Yeah.
Some cultures tend to be more about like fear and dominance.
Okay.
Some countries, I don't want to generalize, but the cultural value is different.
Yeah.
So understanding that, I think, is the key point that helps you drive those conversations. And I don't think it's unique by country. I don't think it's unique by culture. In my experience, having worked across APAC,
Yeah.
having worked in the Middle East, there the commonalities across humans are much more common
Yes.
than the differences.
Yeah. Interesting, because on a recent podcast, we were talking about differences across Europe, and there are huge differences across Europe, as I'm
For
sure
sure.
there are across APAC. Um, and it's easy to stereotype and then get lazy and make assumptions, but it's also good to know that actually, yeah, different communities think sometimes in different ways. So we need to get to the individual. Um, okay, are there any particular books or people that you followed that have particularly helped you, Sammy? Or
You know, I get asked this question often. I'll most probably tell you the most recent book I read. So I don't want to be, but I'll tell you, um, I don't think there are good books and bad books. I think there are the right book at the right time for where you are in your development journey.
right, yeah,
So some of the books that I found really helpful early in my career, if I read now, I probably like, this is all basic stuff.
yeah,
Some of the books that I read now that if I gave in my younger self, they'd be like, what? This has nothing, no relevance to me.
yeah,
There are a couple of books I read recently that just you know made me think a bit differently. One of them that is called Nine Lies About Work,
okay. I have not read
and
that, but I've heard about it. Yeah,
it's fascinating. So it's not necessarily about sales. It's more about organizational design or organizational behavior,
yeah,
um, and it really just talks about nine um, rules, if you will, rules of engagement and in companies, or nine practices in companies
yeah.
that are supposed to do one thing or are done because of one reason, and reality tells you that actually it's almost the opposite of what they're doing.
Okay,
I don't want to spoil it, but it's a fascinating read. I've read it twice, and every couple of years I just pick it up again because you'll find more scenarios that link with what you're saying.
right.
Um, One I read just literally just finished recently, and I think it's a very recent publication. Is called The Geek Way.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and this is written by a professor who I think works for Harvard or Harvard Business School,
yeah,
and he talks about four elements of why geek companies, and he meant they're predominantly tech, but they're not limited to tech.
yeah.
But four ways of working differently at those organizations that make them more successful, produce better products, faster in the market, more competitive.
Okay,
Um, Really nice book. Lots of lots of data in it. And yeah, again, as the more senior I got in my role, the more I understood how things work, the more I got closer to motivation. So both of these books are more about, I think, organizational behavior rather than sales or the tactics and strategies of sales.
yes, yeah, and um, and maybe I'm thinking about brand new sales managers. There are probably some things they need to get to grips with before delving into these areas. Although a lot of people tell
Absolutely,
me to be,
absolutely.
yeah, but a lot of people tell me as a sales manager, you have to be able to provide a context for people that you set the scene, you set the tone, you set the narrative. So reading kind of more widely is going to be helpful at
You
some
know, I
stage.
think I think um, I think a better approach for a new manager is not necessarily a book, although reading a book about sales management is useful
Yeah,
and will definitely give them tips. And it could be any sales strategy.
yeah,
Just choose one and apply it to your team and use that as a common language.
yeah,
But I would actually have a different piece of advice, which is find a mentor, find a sales manager
yeah,
that you trust, you admire, you feel delivers results,
yeah,
and ask them for mentorship. And I think 9 times out of 10, most people will give you the time of day to mentor. And I
yeah,
say mentorship because, in my experience, books either go down the motivations and the psychology part of leadership,
yeah,
or they go down the more technical route of strategy structure. This is
yeah,
how it works. But to have something that does both, I think you need a human to kind of, a mentor would tell you, oh, this happened because of that. It's not
yeah,
because of
yeah,
what you think it is. And
yeah,
I was like, oh yeah, yeah. And that you need the human experience to do that. And then to overcome it, it could be a technical tool. Like it could be, make sure you qualify better next
yeah,
time. Make sure that you ask the right questions. Make sure
yeah,
you challenge. And so that's why I think for fresh managers, having a mentor or someone they can bounce ideas off of is much more valuable than trying to read a book.
yeah, yeah. I have to put a quick little plug in here for the training and coaching that we do at Real Sales
Yeah,
Manager. But absolutely, we made the decision very early on that you can train people, but a key element is that one-on-one setting it in their context, um, allowing people to bounce things off. And yeah, whichever tools and methodologies you use, for example, totally with you. It's how you implement it. It's not is medpic better than nutcases or
Bant or
challenger?
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's. I mean, they're all good.
I've
They're all good, but
they're all exactly just choose one and apply it across organization
yeah,
because I think the discipline of it
yeah,
and the common language of it is what matters. Everything else is just details around how to get it done.
yeah. Okay, Sami, you mentioned the word leadership a lot, and I know it's a topic that's dear to your heart. So if we could just maybe shift and think about that particularly. Firstly, when you talk about leadership, what do you mean? What's different between leadership and management in your view?
Okay, so let's start from management and leadership. I
Okay,
think the biggest difference is um, management is a role in a company and leadership is a way of being. So to give you an example of that,
yeah,
I can make anyone in a company a manager by telling them you're now a manager and you have 5 people reporting to you.
right,
That's it. That's all I need to do.
okay,
I can't make someone a leader. I can't take someone that I tell them you're a leader now. That doesn't work.
right,
Um, Another way of looking at it, you can have a bad manager,
yeah,
but there's no way you can follow a bad leader because once they become a bad leader, you stop following them. They can still report to them and do all the things you need to do as a manager,
Okay,
but it's almost like leadership management is mandatory. Leadership is something you do voluntarily. You follow someone because they're saying or doing something that you want to
right,
emulate or drives you or whatever.
right,
So that's the biggest difference I find between them. And if I want to define leadership from my point of view, it's really about getting things unstuck. It's a very simple definition. So the reason I like this definition, it's not mine. Someone told it to me.
okay,
I can't remember who, but it's the definition I use, and it encompasses I think the three main elements that leadership has to do. First of all, it has to do with other people.
hmm,
So if it's just you and yourself, it's often that things don't get stuck between you and yourself. Things get stuck between you and other people.
right,
So that's one thing.
yeah,
The second thing is getting things unstuck can happen in any place, anytime. So anyone can be a leader. You don't have to be a manager.
yeah,
You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to be the most senior person in the room
yeah,
to practice leadership. It helps you get things unstuck.
yeah.
So it has to do with other people, has to do with things unstuck, and then it has to do with I feel doing well. Doing good. So
What do you mean
I
by
need to
that?
be doing good in the sense that um, those tools of leadership, the ability to influence and lead, the ability to affect people's behavior can be used for good or bad.
Okay,
So what I mean by unstuck is you're looking at the positive aspect of things, of moving things forward,
yeah.
because you could use leadership for many negative things. I mean,
Oh,
just look at the world, look at all the, I don't want to talk about politics, but think about cult leaders.
yeah,
Cult leaders use leadership to influence and affect people. So
yeah,
so do good has to do with other people, not with
yeah.
yourself, and has to do with conflict and helping people move forward.
So some sales managers say to me, but doing good means just exceeding target. Is Yeah, and that's my job. My job is to hit a target
Sure.
and maximize those numbers. Um, but I sense from you that doing good is maybe a bit broader than that.
No, in the definition of leadership that I just shared, yes.
Right.
Like what I just shared is a generic
Yeah.
concept that can be, you can practice leadership between you and your partner and your family
Yeah.
by helping everyone communicate better, by
Yeah.
helping everyone become less anxious. It can be between you and your neighbors. So that's what I mean by leadership. But if we want to drill it down into the corporate world, then you start applying the concepts of, you want to see your team succeed. You want to help people overcome challenges. You want
Yeah.
to um, learn from mistakes. You don't want to be too hard. You want to create a culture of openness,
Yeah.
of psychological safety. So all of those elements are part of both management and leadership. So there is definitely an overlap.
Yeah.
Um, but what I meant by doing good is not necessarily in the corporate sense. Now, in the corporate sense, I think we're starting to get into that area of, is what you're doing ethical? Is it moral? Is it
Yeah,
legal? Is it part of the ESG framework? Is
yeah,
it part of a DEI framework? And all of those things are important. But I think the drive of shareholder held companies,
yeah.
to achieve the, numbers and growth and whatever you want to do, I think mutes the non measurable aspects of doing business. You know,
Okay.
doing good in a wider societal concept sometimes might conflict with corporate strategies and objectives. And I think that's more of a, like, as a society, as a species, we need to decide what's important for shareholders. Is it just money,
Yeah.
or are those other elements also important, even if they mean less money?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of the big debate around, is it just about shareholder value or stakeholder value, and one of the stakeholders is society. What you can argue, um, yeah. So that's a real, and it's interesting. I mean, the research I've seen shows that if you do take on wider responsibilities, it's probably good for narrow shareholder value anyway. So
Yeah.
but many people would relish the opportunity to do good, not just clearly in your role, and as a sales manager you have a responsibility to meet targets and stuff like that, but to do good, it's slightly wider. um, okay, we could talk about that for ages. So leadership, you can practice it anywhere, anyhow. How do you develop leadership? Because as we said, management, I can teach people how to run a forecast meeting and inspect a pipeline and set targets and all that stuff. But how do you help people with really understanding other people, um, how how to do good? Is it how do you develop that?
um I think, and this is gonna sound a bit like, maybe a bit esoteric, but I think the foundation of good leadership is curiosity, and I'll explain why in a second. So, in order for you to not jump on what someone says as a first reaction, in order for you to pause and ask a question, in order for you to breathe when you're upset, and count to 10, and then speak from a place of maybe empathy and rather than anger,
Yeah,
needs you to be curious about why things are happening. And I was asked this question once by a group of individuals who were talking about stereotypes in Asia. How do you avoid following stereotypes when dealing with multiracial, multicultural teams,
yeah,
multi-country teams? And I said, honestly, the simplest thing is to be curious. Why did that person say what they said?
yeah.
Was
Good.
she really being aggressive, or was she upset that day? Was she, from her background? Why is she quiet? Is she really quiet, or is she culturally from a background where women are expected to be quieter? And again, I'm generalizing here,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that sense of curiosity would really help you to step outside of me, my demands, my desires, my things I want to achieve, into, okay, what can we do as a group that will help us move forward? And that brings us back to getting things unstuck. And that's where the aspects of leadership start coming up. So if you want to be a leader, in very simple terms, a leader is someone that other people follow. It's really that simple. And so, how can you get other people to follow you? You know, First thing you do is you want to be respectful and appreciated. You don't want to be someone who's always angry and yelling and doing all that.
yeah,
Now, you become respectful by asking questions, by being curious. What else do you need to do? You need to have a clear vision or direction or objective of what you're trying to achieve or communicate. If it's clear to you, that's excellent, but you have to make sure that it's clear to the people you're dealing with. And that could take the form of being a better communicator. That could be a better listener. So when people ask you questions, you understand why they're asking.
hmm,
It could be trying to explain the same thought in multiple ways. It could be trying to become better at drawing or writing or making diagrams, because it helps you explain yourself. So
yeah,
um, setting a clear vision makes for a good leader. Being curious, asking questions makes for a good leader. Um, helping people along and removing obstacles makes a good leader. It also makes a good manager, for that matter. And what I mean by that is if there's something in your power and influence that you can do to help someone move forward, maybe with little or no positive return to you, you're doing it for the sake of helping someone move forward. That's leadership. um, and it's not a big I'm not talking about sacrifices. I'm talking about things that are small: a phone call, a message, an email, an introduction that can help someone move forward. To you it could be a 5 minute, a 10 minute interaction. To them it could be a lifetime of opportunity. So
Yeah.
that's leadership, just moving things forward. Mediation and helping conflict is also a big part of it. If you see two people that are talking across each other, maybe putting a word in that helps explain what's happening, um, might get the situation unstuck and contribute to them moving forward. And by persistently following the practice of helping others move forward, and mind you, I'm not suggesting someone just becomes completely selfless and not care about themselves, but rather including other people's needs into your everyday life.
Right.
Eventually people are going to look at you and say, all right, what is that person going to do? What are they going to say? And then start following you. And that's kind of like almost the foundation of being a leader.
Yeah, but as you say, there is a danger that you take on everybody else's problems, and and potentially maybe, yeah, some salespeople in particular, yeah, are quite skilled at getting their manager to take ownership of things. So
Actually, that's a
how do you
great
deal
point.
with that?
That's a great
I'm
point. Thank you.
basically agreeing with you, but there are issues.
No, 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 no. That's a fantastic point, Steve. And I'll tell you what happened. I learned this lesson actually quite late in my management journey. So I learned this lesson when I became a general manager. And at the time, my boss saw me struggling, and he said, "You are making a mistake." And he referred to another colleague of mine who made the same mistake, and
Yeah.
that person also made the same mistake. You've inverted the pyramid. I'm like, what?
Okay.
He's like, he's like, think of a pyramid of leadership. You should be on top and everyone around you. Now, what's happening is that your pyramid is inverted. So you have your frontline managers and their managers and the directors. They're all reporting to you, and the problems are going from them to them to them, and they're all ending up at your plate.
Yeah.
Everyone is pushing the problem up, and it's becoming your problem.
Yeah.
He said you need to flip the pyramid around, where instead of taking all the problems coming your way, your job is to make sure that the direction is clear from top to bottom. So
Yeah.
from you to your reports, to their reports, to their reports.
Yeah.
And then when problems arise, you don't take care of them. You don't own the problem. What you do is you find who in the organization is responsible for that problem and connect the two ends and make sure that the problem gets resolved.
Yeah.
So your role as a manager is not to fix the problem. It is to hold the parties accountable for fixing the problem. And that's why if I think about the basics of a sales motion,
Yeah.
it's important to understand the sales motion, because once you figure out what the problem is, then you can go after that and say, this person is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you hold them accountable. And
Right.
the same for wider business. So that's the trick about not owning the problem. Owning the problem makes it that when it comes to you, you need to solve it.
Yeah.
Let me explain this in a different way. And this, I heard someone say this once, and it stuck in my head. We brought in a senior person into a meeting, and that person committed to the customer, Mr. Customer, this is my problem now, I'll get back to you. Slight change. He could have said, Mr. Customer, this is my problem now, and this person is going to get back to you.
Right.
Now, the difference is, it's one is I'm holding that person accountable to getting back
Yeah.
to you, which is the second example, versus I will do it myself.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference in leaders. So keeping the pyramid in the correct orientation is very important, so
Yeah.
that you're not overwhelmed with problems.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, for me, it's because I've seen that issue. I think I suffered from it as a young manager, and I certainly see it in some, because people who want to please, they want to add value. So you take on all these problems, um, and I mean, the word accountability is interesting there, because I think you can take accountability as the manager, but that doesn't mean that the salesperson or the sales manager below you has to. They don't give it up. You can both be
No,
accountable.
no,
So
yeah,
yeah, I'm going to help you solve your problem rather than I'm going to take the problem away and solve it myself.
absolutely,
Is interesting.
absolutely.
Um, okay. Um, so, so when we talk about leadership, particularly for new sales managers, what do you see them struggling with? I think you've touched on a few things there already, but what do you see, the generic issues that maybe new sales managers struggle with? It's
You're talking
obvious.
about
Yeah.
people managers, not like account managers,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point that we discussed earlier in the conversation that has to do with um, understanding that your role is no longer you're not a super individual contributor, you are a
Right.
manager.
Yeah.
So your role is to make sure that your team is clear about what they need to do.
Yeah.
Your role is to be is to make sure that your team understands what their contribution to the overall business is.
Yeah.
Because once you become a manager, you have your team reporting to you, but your team doesn't work in a silo. They have to interact with other individuals in the organization.
Yeah.
So talking to your peer managers and explaining where their teams fit into the process and making sure that your your end-to-end process for your team is covered by other members is
Yeah.
important, so that everyone knows exactly what they contribute.
Yeah.
So knowing where they're going, knowing how they contribute, and then the most important part for managers is to make sure that stumbling blocks are overcome. But like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't become your problem
Yeah.
to fix the problem, but it's your responsibility to make sure the problem gets fixed.
Yeah.
So an example of that could be, oh, you know what, this tool has been down for 3 days, whatever.
Okay.
Now I could be, all right, I'll come back to you until it's fixed. Or you can say, no, go talk to that person. Oh, I talked to that person, they didn't come back. Okay, I'll talk to that person's manager and explain the situation. That person then should come back. So that's how you facilitate overcoming obstacles.
Right.
But I think honestly, the first 2 points, which is understanding the direction the team,
Yeah.
that they need to deliver, and making sure that everyone knows what they're delivering, are the most important things.
Yeah.
A third point that often gets dropped is, is your manager clear, or are you clear about what your manager expects from you? That's another point that a lot of individual contributors miss. They just make an assumption and say,
Yeah.
oh, I think, this is what I need to deliver.
Yeah.
And I would very strongly suggest to any new manager to set up a call with their manager and to be 100% clear about what it is that is
Yeah.
expected of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They need to make zero assumptions on that point,
Yeah. Yeah.
and start from that point. So clear about what they need to do for their manager, clear that their team knows what they need to do, and everyone knows what they need to do individually to contribute to the overall success.
Yeah. That's really interesting, Sammy. Again, I see it's almost a shock for new managers to think that they have to work with peer managers, particularly, systems architects, consultants, delivery. So that's a shock to them. And yeah, that point about being very clear what the contract is with your manager, it's interesting. I did a bit of research for an article about 2 or 3 years ago, looking at why sales managers, actually it was about why sales directors get fired. Um, and when you boil it down, the number one reason why sales directors get fired, and I think it's probably the same with sales managers, is it's some kind of disconnect with their boss. It wasn't that they were doing a bad job. It's just that they weren't doing the job that their boss wanted them to do. And we're all busy. We're all trying to achieve things. You're getting on with things, but I think it's important. As a manager, you don't spend your time just managing upwards, but you have to do some of that. Setting the expectations right, and yeah,
Again, if we go back to the foundations of being a leader, and it's about intentions and people and making sure they get things done and get things unstuck, just being empathetic with your manager, understanding what they want,
yeah,
just makes your life a lot easier. Like, you don't have to manage. Now look, there are going to be bad managers, there are going to be micromanagers, there's going to be situations where no matter what you do, your life is going to suck.
yeah,
That it happens. But there are things you can do to alleviate some of these. Like, doesn't always have to be 100% misery. It could be 60% misery. You can get rid of some things
yeah,
just by being by open and communicating and taking a breath and not trying not to take things personally.
yeah. Interesting. Can I just get your views on, because you said setting the direction is important. Yeah, I think everybody would agree with that. But how much detail do you tend to go into? Because if you set too much direction, it can be almost micromanagement, which
Yeah.
yeah never works in my experience. But you want to be clear with people and set that direction, but not overwhelm them somehow. How I mean, how do you get that boundary right?
It's a good question, Steve. I haven't really thought about that before. Um, I've always focused on the clarity of the direction, but not that level of detail.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what litmus test I would probably use.
Okay.
Um, I'd use the grandma test, which is if I explain the objective to my grandma, would she understand it?
Okay.
And what I mean by that, it is that is someone who is non-technical, not in the business, just an average human being.
Yeah.
If you explain to them that objective, would they understand it? If they understood it, um, that means that at least it's not too detailed. Because
Yeah.
if it's too detailed, too laden with jargon, too specific to your company, it's not gonna fly across. So that's the floor of complexity. Now think of
Yeah.
the ceiling, so it's not too vague and generic. Maybe the other side of it is if you explain that objective to any individual in the company or direction or vision, can they translate that to actions?
Okay.
So I think those would be the two I would say the floor and ceiling. So the floor
Yeah.
is it simple enough that a layperson can understand it, but is it specific enough that someone can then derive actions from it?
Yeah.
And um, and in fact, I think we tend to err too much on the side of being too, and I think that's a fault of people saying, okay, set very objective, very large objectives, like very big, hairy, audacious
Yeah.
goals. I
Yeah.
think you might have read,
Yeah. Yeah.
and those tend to be, we want to, solve humanity's this and that.
Yeah.
What happens in setting these objectives is if you go and read annual reports or go to someone's website and you read what they do, you still don't understand what they do. Like, all right, I understand. Like what you're aspiring to is inspirational and it's awesome and it's I want to work with you,
Yeah.
but I don't understand what it means practically.
Yeah.
Now, then you don't want to go so down to technical details like, oh, we just deliver boxes. But it could be, our vision is to become the world's um, lowest cost delivery company at this quality or this timeline.
Yeah.
Very specific, and it's one of those goals that are you can always improve on and pursue and
Yeah. Yeah.
and vision. And there's nothing wrong with having a vision that doesn't necessarily have to encompass all humanity.
Sure.
So I think those, simple enough that anyone can understand it, but specific enough that people can derive action from it.
Right. Okay. I love the grandma test.
Yeah.
It's similar to the Einstein quote. Can a 6-year-old understand it? But I think
Yeah.
maybe a grandma
Yeah.
is easier. But then that point about, I mean, the only point of setting direction is so that people can take some action. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's just the vision thing, then yeah,
Yeah.
okay, but it doesn't impact anybody's lives whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, okay.
Or it could be overwhelming, Steve. Like it's like, my vision is to, where do I start? What do I do? You don't want to be so big and so vague that it overwhelms. You want it to
Yes.
be specific.
And, and
Yeah.
and again, if I come back to new sales managers, yeah, I think all new sales managers, it's daunting. Yeah, it is a new career. All of a sudden, the things that worked for you in the past don't work. You don't know what levers to pull. So for them to have goals, maybe a long-term goal, but then being very clear about, okay, this is what I need to achieve over the next 3, 6, 12
C-
months, so they can work
can I add
towards it.
something to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. One of the things that's going to happen when a person first becomes a manager is going to get a flood of problems.
Yeah,
Everyone is just going to dump all their problems on them. And I think it's important for managers to resist the temptation to fix all the problems.
yeah,
I think just taking a step back and looking at um, the ones that would really move the needle, the problems that are really affecting the business
yeah,
versus annoyances versus problems that could never be resolved. I think
yeah,
I think you might have been exposed to that quadrant of the urgency and
yeah,
importance of the problem.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think just think, is it important, isn't urgent, and then action accordingly.
Yes,
Um, Another thing that has to do with the problems is the also you can think about the scope of control, what you can, what you
Yeah,
can't
yeah, yeah,
influence.
yeah,
Now, I'm a bit hesitant to use that because it could be, oh, it leads to a behavior of, oh, this is X's problem, this is Y's problem, I can't do anything about it,
yeah,
blah, blah, blah. And it could be a bit demotivating. Because in my experience, honestly, even the most intractable problem, you can do stuff to make it
yeah,
less of a problem.
yeah, yeah.
So that's why I want to avoid that. I think just focusing on things that move the needle best. I think that's a better approach for,
Yeah.
especially for new managers, before you start developing that muscle of instinct about, okay, this is something we could
Yeah, yeah,
influence
yeah,
or
sure.
couldn't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, the important, urgent, click. I mean, the other thing that I find for new managers is they get this flood of problems, as you say, but they also get this flood of stuff from the previous manager. Yeah, he promised I'd get a promotion in 6 months. She said I'd be able to take over this account. They said
Yeah,
this level of discount was fine, and there's no paperwork, and and
yeah,
it's yeah. Uh, yeah. So the advice there is be very, very careful. Yeah.
correct. Yeah,
Uh,
correct.
um, okay, Sammy, this is some fascinating stuff. Can we just spend just 2 minutes? Um,
Hmm.
because a lot of the people listening to this and viewing this, be working in Europe or the US or somewhere, have little experience of working in APAC. You're an expert on the APAC markets. Um, any words of advice or observations for people who have to deal with APAC? I know it's very hard to generalize, but
It is.
yeah.
I just published something on LinkedIn that talks about APAC. So
Okay.
all right, so let's first of all let's define what we're talking about. So we're talking about Asia,
Yeah.
minus the Middle East, minus Turkey,
Yeah.
minus Russia and the stands, which tend to be managed from Europe usually,
Yeah.
plus Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah.
So it's this like the south, like eastern, like east of India, basically everywhere
Yeah.
there is generally considered to be APAC. Now, um, it's very diverse. You have, the two most populous countries in the world, I think, and then maybe the fourth or fifth with Indonesia. So
Okay. Yeah.
big populations. The second and third and fourth biggest economies with China, India, and Japan. Um, I don't know how many tens of languages across. I mean, India alone probably has 20, and then you have,
Yeah.
so it's a very varied and very complex. I don't want to say complex, just very varied environment. It's
Yeah.
it's it's easy to say put it under the APAC umbrella, but it's actually quite diverse.
Yeah.
Um, so what advice would I give? First of all, I'd go back to the curiosity point. Don't make any assumptions. Just because something worked in Europe or in the US,
Yeah.
don't assume it's going to replicate well in Asia. In fact, assume that it's not going to work, and start from the assumption that you are going to go and explore and learn and experiment.
Yeah.
So if someone is approaching Asia, they need to keep that in mind. That whatever worked elsewhere might not work. Um, as I said early in the call, Asia tends to be a bit of a collective culture, and
Yeah.
social harmony is important. So being aggressive, being very vocal, being direct in your communications sometimes doesn't translate well in Asian cultures.
Yeah.
Um, Now, Australia is a bit different. I think Australia happens to be more Western, more European
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
its style. But with the exception of maybe Singapore, most of the other countries in the region are a bit softer in their language. So the yeses are not super enthusiastic. The no's, there's almost no no's. You have to listen for what the hesitation, the softness in the yes, and to know that it's a no.
Right.
Um, that's part of like the things that I had to learn when I first came to Asia. Um, Doing business is not always about speed in the APAC framework. It's sometimes about, again, it takes it back to the social cohesion, but it's sometimes about knowing the partner, knowing the client you're working with, going out to lunch and dinner with them,
Yeah.
making sure there's a trusted environment. You might experiment, do a small project or pilot or POC
Yeah.
first, and then you go on to the bigger one.
Yeah.
Often clients would refuse to change vendors because they feel the relationship is more valuable to them than a new set of features or functionality.
Yeah.
So there's even that sort of loyalty
Yeah.
to vendors, because when you choose a vendor, you're not just buying a product from a website. You're
Yeah.
actually knowing the team and getting to know them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Patience is important. Things
Okay.
they take their time. You can't rush the process. You can't especially if you're managing a remote team from Europe in Asia or
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
US. You can't. It doesn't matter how much you hammer and whip your team. It's not going to go any faster. It's going to take its time. Um, but the upside of all of this is once you develop that relationship and once things get moving, they will move quickly
Okay.
because the you know the summary I once heard about Asia that I really liked is think slow, act fast.
Right.
So take your time in planning, take your time in experimenting, doing all your due diligence, and then once everything's ready, you can then roll it out quickly. And I think that applies to also the relationships. Take your
Yeah.
time in building the relationship, but once a relationship is established, it just opens up a lot of doors.
Right.
Yeah, and also the other thing, I think this is a bit more technical, but it's practical. There is no unified framework across Asia for legal,
Okay.
compliance, regulatory, shipping, none of that.
Yeah.
So in Europe, you get approval for a product, safety, blah blah blah, whatever you need
Yeah.
to do. It's open across. The EU is open to you. In the
Yeah.
US, it's one country.
Yeah.
The UK might be another country, and that's it.
But
But Asia, each country has its own framework.
yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind when you launch.
Yeah.
Is it worth launching in a country? Maybe not, because the cost of running business in that
Yeah.
country is just too high to justify the investment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last thing I want to mention is partnerships. I would consider partnerships as a key element of a rollout of any APAC strategy. So um, it'll have to be part of your go-to-market. It'll have to be part of your day-to-day, and you have to genuinely treat them as partners, not just resellers, like partners. Like they have a stake in the business, they have a say. They will introduce you. The introduction in itself is valuable to them, and you have to respect
Right.
that.
Okay. That's really interesting. And it's going to be difficult for some people who are steeped in a US or a Western European mindset around how we do business and have been successful um, to
Mm.
operate in this different environment. Uh, okay, Sami. Uh, Listen, I'm going to call this bit to a close. This is a great conversation. We've got a big bonus question that I'll tack on the end, but
Sure.
to bring this, so what would be the two or three key things out of everything we've discussed? The two or three key things that you would stress for a new or an aspiring sales manager. What are the things that you would say they should take away from this conversation?
I'll break it down to two answers. So
Okay.
aspiring and you are kind of different. So
Yeah. Yeah.
aspiring, um, don't be afraid of standing up and being seen and viewed. So if you are
Yeah.
looking for that promotion, you have to be seen.
Okay.
No one's going to promote you just for your performance
Yeah.
because management is not about your individual performance. It's about leading people.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
leading
Yeah.
people has to do with speaking up, communicating, setting vision. So you have to be comfortable with standing up.
Right.
Um, start if possible, start having conversations with other managers, not someone whose role you're trying to take over. What is it about management that they find interesting? What is it about man? And have these common conversations because when the promotion conversation comes around,
Yeah.
there's those people will be asked and they will be consulted. Maybe they're not part of the decision
Yeah.
process,
Yeah.
but if someone comes to me and tells me, listen, this individual is ready to be a manager, I'd be like, okay, I haven't worked with them before, but let me ask.
Yeah.
So they're going to ask around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, don't be afraid to do stuff that is outside your typical job description. And I'm not saying take on more work than what you're supposed to. I'm
Yeah.
saying try to pick one or two stretch assignments or interesting projects to get involved in.
Yeah.
It could be building a new structure. It could be some, volunteering program. It could be a community newsletter.
Yeah.
Getting your name out there is going to help your chances of being promoted.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, being a strong individual contributor is a good, I think, stepping stone towards
Yeah.
becoming a manager. But it's not the all and be all.
Yeah.
It's all about the personality, ability to deal with
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
resolve through resolution, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
for fresh
Interesting.
managers, I think I mentioned it. You know, clear with your boss about their objectives, clear with your team about your objectives.
Yeah.
Don't overwhelm yourself with problems. Try to look for opportunities and talk to other peer managers, both for advice and also for making sure that your team gets what they need to be successful.
And also, I think for your own personal, I mean, to have a mentor or peer managers who know what it's like, you know, it's lonely sometimes, it's difficult. You can't
Yeah,
discuss everything with your team. You
you're
may have a
absolutely right.
partner that's good for you, but yeah, to have that support network. Uh,
100%.
yeah. Well, what brilliant advice, Sami. Thanks ever so much for that.
This
We've,
was an absolute pleasure.
yeah, well, a very quick break, and then I've got two final questions for you.
Bonus question.
So, Sami, as a bonus question, we all learn from our mistakes, but if we can learn from other people's mistakes, that's even better sometimes. So, are you happy to just share with us kind of the biggest mistake you think you've made as a manager and what you learned from it? And then maybe your biggest triumph as well and what you learned from it.
I mean, if it hadn't come across so far, I'll reiterate it here, and it's the biggest lesson because it was my biggest mistake, which is that I wasn't clear about what my manager expected from me in the role I was promoted to. So throughout my career, I've been promoted to several roles, and um, they've been, I would say, soft landings for me because I knew the team, I knew the individuals, and it was kind of just rolled with it.
Okay.
For that specific role, when I was promoted, I made the mistake of not having a one-to-one with my manager, whom I'd known before. Like I'd known before in several capacities, but he was never my direct manager. I never picked up the phone and called him and said, "Sir, what do you need exactly? For what does good look to you?"
Yeah.
And instead, I spoke to his, he had a support team around him, and I spoke to different people, and they all gave me their tips and advice.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, they only gave me what they saw they needed for their success from my role.
Yeah.
So that first year, um, my wife told me you didn't speak for a whole year, and that's how I handle stress. Like when I'm stressed, I tend to shut down because I'm thinking about the problem in my head.
Yeah.
That first year was the most negatively stressful period in my life. What I mean by negatively stressful, I've not only was I stressed, I didn't know what to do about it. So in other periods of my life, when I was, after that, so that was the first year I was made a general manager of the business, and then I ended up figuring out how to get it done. But that year was really stressful, and I had to rely on mentors. I had to rely on other people who I would call and ask for advice,
Yeah.
and then eventually I figured out how to manage it and uh, to basically this is going to sound a bit basic, but to know how to problem solve
Yeah.
in the context.
Right. Yeah.
So it was because the problems were not black and white technical or customer problems that you can address. The
Yeah.
problems were complex. The problem wasn't even well defined. The multiple stakeholders.
Yeah.
There's a term for it. I think it's maybe omni problem. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
where it's not well defined. So
Yeah.
so it was a challenge for me to understand that. But I feel it also gave me a very strong sense of resiliency because
Right.
after that, um, like it doesn't matter how big the problem looked and seen from the outside. I just knew that once I broke it down into its constituent parts, it could be resolved and I could get over it. So,
Right.
but the biggest lesson I've learned, which is the one I keep mentioning, is be 100% clear with your manager about what they expect from the role.
Yeah. And again, I think people do learn that the hard way, and it is worth spending the time sitting. I mean, even you have to get on an aeroplane and sit in front of the person and just say, "Let's be clear. What is it you're expecting?" Okay.
100%.
And your biggest triumph then, Sami? What are you most
Would be
proud
the
of?
end of that. Would be the end of that journey. So that the
Okay.
end of that year, where so just to give you an idea, the first year I probably missed my target by maybe 10% or
Okay.
12%.
Okay.
Disastrous. And we're talking
Yeah.
about millions of dollars here
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
was managing a lot of this. And the second year, I almost hit it on the nose. Not quite, but almost
Okay.
on the nose. And both of them, there was like growth built into the plan, yada yada. But
Yeah.
it was just a difference. And those are the results. Now, but what happened differently between the two cycles? The first cycle was, like I said, I took on everything on my shoulders. versus the second cycle is when I inverted the pyramid. The first cycle, the first year was when I would just get into this, oh, there's a problem I can't solve. Okay, I'll just brace for the beating I'm going to get for the problem versus, oh, there's a problem. Okay, let's think about how we're going to solve this problem. Just the attitude of addressing it. The first year where I felt it was I inherited a disjointed operation, negative team, not the team wasn't clear about what they were doing. No one was clear about where they were going. Versus afterwards, I had some of the most coherent teams. I was uh, um, specifically for the leaders I had running the business. I was praised for my leaders, not me personally. They said you hired the right people.
Yeah.
So it was just coming from someone who thought he could run a team to someone who was actually running the team.
Okay, and there's no magic switch, but it's a lot of things all coming together for you to be comfortable there.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. You've had an amazing journey, Sami. Thanks ever so much for sharing everything with us.
Absolutely, Steve. It was a great pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Okay, just very, very quickly. I know you've taken a bit of a career break. What's next for you, or are you not going to share that yet?
Yeah, no. I absolutely. So I've been. So to be honest with you, this change in career was not optional. I was made redundant due to part of the tech industry redundancies that have been happening. And in all honesty, if I put myself in my manager's shoes at the time, I would have taken the same decision.
Okay.
So it's not. I don't, from a business point of view, I don't disagree with what happened, but on a personal level, it was tough.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding is that I think the change in employment and the change in the relationship between employers and employees, and that companies now are much more focused on outcomes rather than just roles and hiring people, I think opens the door to more objective based or project based or KPI based deliverables rather than just having a career. So the concept that I heard is a career portfolio where you either have multiple small careers or you're running 2 or 3 things on a part-time basis, and that's what I'm adopting. So I'm taking on the technical term is fractional leadership, but I don't like that term very much. What I'm saying is if a company has a sales challenge, I'd like to come in and help them address that challenge, but not as a consultant, in the sense not as here are your problems, here are your solutions, here's the report, I'll see you guys later. But it's more, let's work together on solving that problem. Now that might mean I come in 1 or 2 days a week to help set direction, look at reports. It might mean a 6-month, 9-month engagement. And those companies, could be startups that don't have a clear go-to-market that need to establish something, or it could be established companies that have enjoyed organic growth, word of mouth, internal account expansion, but now need to establish a structured sales process. And then that's when I can step in and help them do that. So really deploying my expertise in the area that I enjoy most, which is sales leadership, both sales and leadership, and help companies move forward in that sense.
Well, it's obvious that you enjoy it. The passion that you talk about, both sales and leadership, is just comes shining through. Well, best of luck with that. It sounds exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah. All right. So with that, I'll just say thanks a lot, and best of luck with the future.
Thanks, Steve. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
If you are an aspiring or new sales manager in complex business to business, or you know of somebody who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager.com. That's realsalesmanager, all one word.com, to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help become as effective as possible, as quickly as possible.